Good afternoon. My name is Ricky Bevington. I'm president of the World Affairs Council of Atlanta. Thank you for joining us today. The World Affairs Council of Atlanta is a nonprofit, nonpartisan membership organization. Our mission is to inspire Atlanta to lead globally. We are a forum for informed discussion of global affairs and impact Metro Atlanta, which is why you're here today, ready to hear from NPR's Joanna Kakissis. Our program, this and all of our programs are made possible thanks to members who invest in Atlanta's need for global engagement and lifelong learning. And you can learn more about the World Affairs Council of Atlanta at our website. We're at wacatlanta.org. That's wacatlanta.org. Welcome to today's program, War Zone Reporting in Ukraine. This will be an interactive program, so please use the Q&A function on your Zoom to pose questions. Please be brief. Please ask one question at a time. I appreciate that. Our featured speaker is Joanna Kakissis, a longtime international correspondent with National Public Radio, who now leads the Kyiv Bureau in Ukraine. Kakissis was born in Greece, grew up in North and South Dakota, and spent her early years in journalism at the News and Observer in Raleigh, North Carolina. She began reporting in Ukraine shortly before Russia invaded in February 2022. She covered the exodus of refugees to Poland and has focused on the war's human costs, profiling the displaced, families of prisoners of war, and a 90-year-old mermaid who swims in a minefield sea. We are going to meet that woman later in the program. Kakissis highlighted the the tragedy for both sides with a story about the body of a Russian soldier abandoned in a hamlet that he had helped to destroy. She also shed light on the potential for nuclear disaster with a report on the shelling of Nikopol by Russians occupying a nearby power plant. Needless to say, Joanna Kakissis has so many stories that she'll be able to share with us today and to talk about reporting from a very scary situation. Joanna Kakissis, welcome to the World Affairs Council of Atlanta.
Thank you so much for having me, Ricky. And welcome to everybody.
Along with everybody, we have a really great crowd today. You are joining us today from Kyiv, where That's it is nighttime. So where are you? Just maybe help us place you rather than just the room we're seeing behind you.
So I'm roughly in the center of the city. Let's just put it that way. That's where we're located. And because of power cuts, we're kind of constantly on generators and chronic power cuts every few hours. So the city's quite dark right now everywhere you go. People who don't have generators don't have light and don't have power. Everything's very quiet at night because of the curfews. People don't go out. People usually stay home, hang out with their friends, with their family by candlelight, and just go about their days or go about their nights. And the thing about Kyiv is it's still everything's still happening. There's still cafes and restaurants open, the supermarkets are still stocked, people are still going to work, but it's happening within the confines of power cuts because of these of all the damage to infrastructure due to missile strikes, and because of the constant threat of a missile strike. There are always alarms, like air raid alerts going off on phones. The government doesn't take them very seriously. Everyone's got their phone on. So you live your life as normally as you can, but understanding that at any minute that could change.
You talk about a lot of people functioning by candlelight at night. Do you have heat? How cold is it?
So yeah, if you've got, we've got heat. Most people have heat right now because of access to generators, and there have been donations of generators. We, in particular, at the Bureau, have backup generators. So whenever the power goes out, we're well protected. There are other households that aren't so lucky. We're an organization, we're a corporation. We have many people in the office here, so we have to have this working. Just like businesses, you'll see businesses here like restaurants or cafes. Everyone's got a generator if they're operating a business, but some households don't have them. So they just kind of wait through the power cuts, or they wear coats. Right now, it's actually unseasonably warm. But when I was here in November, it was very, very cold. In November and December, it was very, very cold. And people were wearing their coats to bed, and going to these warming centers that the city had set up. where there were generators and where they could get a hot cup of tea or where they could charge their phones. Right now, this January, at least since in the week since I've been here, it's been quite mild. So you don't have to wear your coat to bed at night. Oh, man.
Well, what
Yeah.
you're describing is really you're living the day-to-day experience of people in a war zone. And when we think about wars reporting, we often think about reporters ducking into trenches alongside soldiers, and it's very dramatic and in the moment, but you have chosen a different kind of way to report on this war side by side with everyday people. Why do audiences like us benefit from this type of approach?
I think with every story, and I've thought about this with practically every story that I've done, even back when I was a local newspaper reporter, you have to try to see any experience or any policy change or any event through the eyes of a few people or a person, one person ideally, because sometimes readers and listeners really can connect to that. Because there's just so much news, especially on Ukraine every day. You have it coming from all directions. And you know, we don't have a ton of people here in Ukraine like other news organizations have like 100 people. We don't. And so we have to be careful about the kinds of stories we choose, and they have to be stories not only that are relevant, but stories that can really connect with our listeners. So the listeners will remember the stories and will remember, you know, what that person that you brought to the story, what they experienced. And once you can feel the story, once you can feel what it's like to be cold, as much as you can with descriptions, but what you can feel like to lose a child, what you can feel like to lose your home, or to be living in the middle of a potentially disastrous situation where you could be annihilated by a nuclear power meltdown. All these things have to be told through the people experiencing them. And I feel very strongly about that. In terms of combat, I mean, I haven't done a whole lot of combat reporting, like frontline reporting. We have several people on our staff who want to do that and who do that more often. But I feel like, you know, that's really well covered territory. And I think my job as the Kyiv correspondent is to show the world what Ukrainians are living right now, and through sound and through characters and through scenes, bring to the audience a slice of life that unlocks something for them, that answers a question for them, and the people, and so they can connect also with the people. They're going to remember those people, and they're going to remember that experience. That's what's really important for me throughout this a year.
So let's meet one of those characters, a 90-year-old woman. This is the mermaid that I referenced. Let me just share my screen. Hang on one sec. Sorry for the technical pulling back the curtain. Okay, sharing my screen. Here we go. Share. Let me put this in present mode. Here we go. Okay, who is this? Introduce us to this woman.
Yes, we have to. She's a wonderful person, and she's representative of, I think, of the Ukrainian spirit. This is Halina Druz. She's 90 years old, and for nearly all of her life, she's been swimming in the Black Sea in Odessa. And every day, even in winter, she swims in the Black Sea. And when they told her that she couldn't swim in the sea, there were police officers now all over the shoreline of Odessa because there are floating mines in there, and they're like, please don't swim in the sea because the mine could explode and kill you. But no matter what, they could not convince Halina to get out of the beach, or get out of the sea and get onto the beach. Even the beach is actually a little bit unsafe. She just kept swimming and swimming and telling every police officer that went after her, she said, I'm a mermaid, I'm a Ukrainian mermaid, and I'm not getting out of the water because I belong here, and I'm not going to let Russia or even the thought of being blown up by a mine change that for me. So it was funny to watch her sort of dodge the cops because they were all after her. And, you know, again, she's 90 years old. She's not, you know, like, she's in some ways the perfect criminal because she's 90 years old. But what I really liked her is that she really put to as an example to her words and her actions, I think, show that the Ukrainian spirit is all about, and that's what's I think people have been really connecting with in following following Russia's war on Ukraine, is that they refuse to be cowed. They refuse to be put in a corner and told to be afraid and to not and to cower away from Russia. No, they continue to live their lives. They continue to challenge what they see happening around them, and it's quite inspiring as a journalist to see this. And I think it's fueled so much of the success that the Ukrainian military has had. It's kept up the spirit of the Ukrainian military because they see that people so energized, people like Drew, so energized about resisting what's happening there.
Well, there's another family that you've met, this little girl. I really would love to hear you talk about not only her mom and her story, she's actually Russian, but this just sort of seeing this war through the eyes of this little girl as well. So tell us about these two characters.
Having problems here?
Did we lose you, Joanna?
I briefly, I'm here, and I see Yulia and I see Miroslava. So I think
so tell us about Yulia's story as a Russian who came to Ukraine, and then I'd also love, well, obviously, her daughter has taken your job. You've got some competition here, but
she actually declared herself the Kyiv correspondent and took my equipment.
When you tell us Yulia's story, if you could share just your anecdotes about what does the war look like through the eyes of her daughter as well, this little girl, from two perspectives, a Russian mother and her young daughter.
Sure. I mean, the backstory on Yulia is very interesting. She came over to Ukraine as basically an 18-year-old Russian nationalist, thinking she was going to come over here and rough up some Ukrainians. But as soon as she showed up, she realized that everything she'd learned in Russia about Ukraine was wrong. And she was so angry that she disconnected from her family back home and her friends back home who were involved in the Russian nationalist movement, and decided to join the Ukrainians and became a Ukrainian soldier and a Ukrainian citizen. And she's a Ukrainian war hero, actually. And so it was just fascinating to watch her explain the change in her mindset. And I remember at one point she was actually across the battlefield from her ex-boyfriend. And he said, we'll create a corridor for you to cross safely, come back to Russia. And she said, no, I'm here with my gun and I have a clean shot of you and I'm going to shoot you. So you get out of the way because I'm fighting with the Ukrainians. So I was like, wow, that happened. But that transformation did happen. And it happened with other Russians as well who are fighting with a Russian battalion for Ukraine. What was interesting about Miroslava, her daughter, who's now 7, is that she joked about everything about her mother going to war, but you could tell it really unsettled her. Like every time she would point to her mother's fatigue, she knew that that meant that her mother was about to leave once the fatigues were hanging on the coat hanger on the coat rack at their apartment. So she didn't like she was proud of her mom being a soldier, but she was always like, if she goes away, she might not come back. And that, that was very clear when I was talking to her. But I asked her if she knew what was happening, with this war. And I interviewed Yulia and in this picture, Yulia and Miroslava before the war, but I've stayed in touch with them the whole year. Actually, I just saw them a week ago. And I asked Miroslava, do you know what's happening? Do you know what this war means? And I said, do you know who Vladimir Putin is? And she's like, I don't know what Vladimir Putin is, but I think he's a spider. And the one thing Miroslava is afraid of is spiders. So in her mind, she kept hearing people say Putin, Putin, Putin. And in her mind, she made Putin a spider. He was a monster in her head. She didn't really know what he did, but he was definitely a spider. So, kids interpret what they see here in very different ways. And now when I saw her a week ago, she's been uprooted from Ukraine and she feels they don't live here anymore. And she feels very very bad about not being with her friends, about not being in the country that she grew up in. But she knows that the spider, she's like, the spider has gotten bigger. So she feels like now the spider's taking over her country. So that's, I thought that was very interesting to hear a little kid describe how she interpreted what adults were saying around her.
You know, children bring up ethical concerns whenever, and anybody who's been a reporter knows when you're talking to kids, you've got to get their parents' consent. But it also, what you're describing brings up sort of a broader issue of when particularly Western media cover armed conflict, there's a line, it can become exploitative, it can become kind of a misery voyeurism. Can you give an example of a time when you just opted, you made a decision based on what you felt crossed an ethical line?
That's a good question. There was back in the spring, as some of you may remember, there was a big steel plant in Mariupol. It was basically the last stand of the Ukrainian soldiers in Mariupol. They all had holed up into basically the catacombs of the steel plant, along with some civilians. And they stayed there for months as the Russians just mercilessly bombed this place. And, like the ceiling was falling in on them and everything. Well, the Red Cross managed to evacuate some of the civilians, actually all of the civilians, and at the point that I'm going to bring up now, it was the first group that was evacuated. And I was waiting in a big parking lot, which was been transformed into sort of an aid center in the city of Zaporizhia, along with like what seemed to be hundreds of journalists. There's so many of us. And I struck up this conversation with this little kid named Sasha, who was from Mariupol, and he was there waiting for his friend Vova. And Sasha was telling me, oh, Vova is like, we took Kung Fu classes together. He's so good at Kung Fu and he's so funny. He made all of us laugh, but he's really, really good. And when he comes off the bus, I'm going to show you how, like, all of our moves that we used to do. He was so excited to see his friend, right? Well, the doors open, the people come out of the bus, and the first, what Sasha sets eyes on Vova is pale, Vova is drawn, Vova looks like he's been crying, he looks like, and he hasn't taken a shower in months. He looks terrible. And so I see Sasha go from being this happy, like super excited little boy to bursting into tears. As this all is happening, all the reporters, of course, run to the people coming out of the bus, and they surrounded Vova, and Vova was panicking because he didn't expect to see all these reporters and people sticking cameras in his face and stuff. And Sasha sprinted over there, takes off his coat, puts it around Vova, and then basically blocks all the reporters with his body and says, no interviews to the reporters, and guides Vova away. I didn't run up there. I just saw this from the side. And, I thought afterwards, should I go and ask Vova ask Sasha if Vova will talk to me? But I felt like it was just the wrong moment. I felt like whatever information, whatever soundbite I guess I was going to get from Vova at that point, it wouldn't be very good, and it would be under such duress that I wouldn't even feel good about it. So I just watched. I watched it unfold, and it stuck with me. Like, when it's one of the many things that stuck with me in this war. But it really, sometimes I think about it. I think about those two a lot, and I think about whether that decision was right or not. And I always come to the conclusion that it probably was. I never got to talk to Vova. He ended up going to another town and resettling with his family, and I hope he's doing well. But I got other interviews, and I thought that was fine. But I think we need to be conscious of and very sensitive to the fact that people are really traumatized, and especially kids. We have to be very careful around kids. Vova did not want to talk to any of us, and he didn't.
Yeah, that's incredible. And that goes back to these split-second decisions that journalists have to make. And you're a human being before you're a journalist. And it sounds like you were human in that moment first. Looks like we have an internet delay. Joanna, are you still with us? Wait, we've got you back. Are you there? We'll let it buffer for a minute.
Ricky, I think
Okay, we can hear you. We can't see you. But are we live with audio?
I hope all of you are.
This is not the first. Oh, there, you're back. Okay.
I'm
this is
back. I'm
not-
so sorry. This
No,
is
don't
very
apologize.
common.
It's very common. In
Kyiv,
fact,
just to let you know.
we've done several.
You're living a normal interview here.
We've done several of these with people in Ukraine, and I think one was like in a military bunker. He was working, he's in the military, and he just kept stopping our interview, and he had to go, make a call or make an order. And I just was really impressed at how this is what you described. You live your life in between these moments of disruption. So
Absolutely.
we're experiencing alongside you.
Sorry about that.
No, don't apologize. So I wanted to introduce our audience to another family that you met along the way, who represent some of the divided loyalties. We are hearing obviously about the overwhelming sense of solidarity between many Ukrainians against Russia, but there are parts of Ukraine, and there may be communities and households where it's not as black and white, particularly the closer you get to Crimea. So let me share my screen again, and we are going to go back to meet this family. Tell us about this
our
family.
partisans. Okay, so this is one of several families I met in Kherson who they describe themselves as partisans, and that's a broad term, meaning that they did everything from help the Ukrainian military with intel, to figuring out who collaborators were, to, in this case of this family, making little stickers of the Ukrainian flag and sticking them up all over town secretly. So to remind the Russians that Kherson was not Russia. So everybody did it. The mom is on the right, and all of her kids spent hours making these little stickers. And they're just made with markers, and in this case, they've actually written, Kherson is free. I have a couple of these stickers. But they put them up on the side of bus stops, inside buses, inside offices, outside on buildings, and they'd stick them up like they have to be really careful so nobody would catch them, right? So this family here, obviously very pro Ukraine, and worked with other families who where maybe, for example, the parents were more involved, were like passing on information to the Russians, to the Ukrainians, about passing on information about the Russians to the Ukrainian soldiers, or like I said, in some cases, adults were watching who may be collaborating with the Russians and passing that information on to the Ukrainians, so they knew who was basically working with the Russians to keep the occupation going. But not all families were like this. Or there are also families in Ukraine, many of them have left, who I'm not sure if they were pro-Russian, but they were definitely like, we can live with this. And those people, are the ones that were right now that the Ukrainians are trying to figure out: are they collaborators? Are they traitors? Or where do they fit in this picture? But the conversation is also happening in Kherson, and it happens in all towns that were previously occupied. You have people wondering, is my neighbor a collaborator? Is my neighbor a traitor? And that's where I saw this. And here's some graffiti. The word collaborator actually spray painted on the side of a gate into somebody's home. And we were driving past. I said, "Oh, stop! Let me go see if anybody's around." And then, we talked to the neighbors, and then it turned out that the neighbor across the street was accusing the family inside this house of passing on information about family members in the first family, in the neighbor's family, and the neighbor who spray painted it on said, "Well, if it wasn't for that, if it wasn't for this family that lives in this building, my mother would be alive. My brother wouldn't be in some Russian jail somewhere. It's their fault. It's their fault. And then of course, somebody comes out from this building and says, no, you got it all wrong. These people are good, and you don't understand the fine line between like wanting to survive and wanting to, we couldn't speak out. So you can't call us collaborators just because we didn't speak out. We were just trying to survive. So those kinds of conversations are very delicate, and you spray paint this on the side of a building. Those accusations, you can't wash those away. The family inside that house is going to be saddled with that accusation for a long, long time. It's not easy to wash those away.
It's just hard to imagine if any of us being in a situation where we've got a military occupying our neighborhood, and we have to survive. You have to take care of your kids, and it's neighbor against neighbor, and that's what parts of Ukraine are experiencing as the Russians were occupying and then pushed back. And you're right, the human toll of this war will last for generations and generations. And I think that it's just like the kind of story that's really hard to just tell in 3 minutes. Is there anything that you have an audience here in Atlanta? What is it that you can't capture as a professional journalist in Ukraine? I'm sure it's more than one, but is there anything that you just feel like you can't communicate it strongly enough?
I think the nuance between, this idea of who collaborator is and who a traitor is, and that line, I think the nuance there and the shades. I'm still learning a lot about Ukraine, and I don't know, Ukrainians draw that line differently than where I would draw the line, for example. And based on your own personal experience, if you've had a family member who's been killed by the Russians or who's been imprisoned by the Russians, you're not going to have much sympathy for somebody who just did what he had to do to survive during the occupation. They're going to say, well, why didn't you fight back? And why did you do something about it? They're going to think like, well, maybe you just went along because you got extra money, or maybe you secretly like the Russians. I think that's very hard to communicate, that sort of nuance. I also think it's hard to communicate a year into this war. The we're going to have the 1-year anniversary in next month, and people's hopes and sense of where they want their country to go has really changed too. They've hardened again, very much hardened against Russia and Russians. There's no sympathy at all for Russians who don't protest their government and go to jail and actively fight for it. If you're like a Russian who's run away somewhere else because you think that you're going to be persecuted for your beliefs, the Ukrainians don't have much pity for those, much empathy. Not just pity, empathy for those folks. And they're also like, are we going to be European in the way that we believe that we are? Is Europe going to stick by us as we fight for what we believe is the European ideal for liberal democracy? Those kinds of questions are discussed all the time in Ukraine. At the same time, people are trying to survive and live their day-to-day lives. They're having a really hard time sort of picturing what Ukraine is going to look like after this. I think everyone believes that Ukraine is going to win. The Ukrainians are very, very committed to the idea of winning, and to them, winning means reclaiming all the territory that Russia has taken. But beyond that, how will we move in a world where, after all this decimation by the war? That's really hard to communicate right now, because the goalposts keep changing. The ideas that people have of themselves as Ukrainians, as Europeans, keeps changing. And I'm trying to constantly keep my finger on the pulse of that, because it seems to change every time I come here, what it means to be a Ukrainian, and a Ukrainian in a European world. So those kinds of things are hard, I think are hard to communicate. in a radio report.
Let me pause this for just a moment to invite our audience to use the Q&A function. If you'd like to ask Joanna a question about what life is like in Ukraine right now, any questions about being a journalist in a war zone, anything that she's talked about, feel free to use the Q&A function and I will ask the question. So ask one question at a time and be brief so that I don't have to do a ton of extra reading. I appreciate that. Joanna, I am curious because I've been listening to you on NPR for many years, covering all sorts of interesting international issues. How is reporting from Ukraine different from reporting any other reporting experiences that you've had, or even other conflicts that you've covered or your colleagues have covered?
I think Ukraine is a complex story because there's so much attention on it and prolonged attention. I mean, when I covered the refugee crisis, as it was called, the refugee crisis, it was actually just like mass exodus of Syrians from a war zone into trying to find safe haven into Europe. I felt like people were interested in that story, but only for a short amount of time. Just like for a few months or 2 to 3 months. And then after that, you really had to fight to get people to stay interested in it. The interest in Ukraine is wide, wide ranging and consistent. And I feel like trying to fill that insatiable interest that people have in Ukraine can sometimes be challenging compared to other stories. I feel like within this past year that I've been in and out of Ukraine, I don't think the interest has waned at all. And so you always, when you're here, you always have to be on your toes, you know, in a way that, I'm not saying that in a way that you don't have to in other places, but it's compared to other places. I've never felt like every single day, it's like, oh, it could be like a, you know, top of the news story, you know, and that's how it feels like every day here sometimes. And so I feel that's challenging. And in some ways reporting here is easier than reporting in other places. I feel like people are very interested in talking. They're very open to talking. They want to show you their village, what's happened to them. They want to introduce you to their families. They talk very openly about the problems Ukraine has. So in those ways, it's easier than in reporting in a place where you're like, you know, colleagues that I have in Russia, fellow journalists in Russia, have a much harder time reporting there. Or, you know, journalists in China or journalists in places where people feel less comfortable talking. But here, no, people it's very easy to interview people here. It's just that, like, again, keeping up with the constant interest that their audience has. Yeah, you feel like you're running you're sprinting all the time when you're here. Yeah.
and the Ukrainians are also documenting this themselves with their own smartphones. And we do have a question from Sanford Greskin, who asked, do you feel there is a good balance in international support between social and military needs?
That's a great question. I think so far there is, and I say that because in terms of social needs, the Ukrainians have been brilliant at starting these kind of small to medium scale crowdsourcing campaigns. You meet anybody from like somebody down the street, like I'm just gonna, this is a slight exaggeration, but like a lemonade stand. Some kids have a lemonade stand because they're trying to raise, money to get 3 helmets for somebody they know on the front line. You have something as small scale as that, and then you have GoFundMe accounts, and you have like PayPal accounts is starting up where people are finding are sourcing equipment, night goggles, anything that the military needs, and in addition to generators, to clothes, to smartphones, to hotspots. I mean, everybody's involved in sourcing this stuff for the people of Ukraine. So at the moment, even though there are places in Ukraine where things are still very difficult, like in the East, where it's very hard to get humanitarian aid, humanitarian aid on a private level has really kept pace with what's been given to the military by by countries around the world. So I don't know how long it's going to last. If there's going to be fatigue, I expect that there's going to be fatigue, and people are going to start, giving less and less. I think we're starting to see that a little bit now in terms of non-military. And of course, the big worry of the Ukrainians is that what if the West, starts getting tired of giving us weapons, and we can't give you any more. And I mean, that's a doomsday scenario. But at the moment, because of all these small to medium enterprises, even large scale, in some cases, I feel like everyone's trying to make an effort to source what people need here, and they've been pretty successful at it.
We actually do have a question from an anonymous attendee who is asking about that. Home generators, are they something that people really need right now? And do you have any suggestions about how to donate them so that they're actually reliably delivered to those who need them? I think that's an important point about humanitarian aid, is you can give cash and money and things.
Yeah.
But getting them to the people who actually need them and deserve them is a completely other project. So I'll let you answer.
That's a good question. Yeah, generators. I mean, there's still a couple months left in the winter, and generators are always welcome because they're just hard to get here. In terms of where they would go, a couple reliable. The Kyiv School of Economics has a very reliable portal. I think that they're very transparent about what they get and where it goes. The Kyiv School of Economics.
Kyiv School.
Yeah,
of
sorry.
Economics.
Yeah,
Okay.
The Kyiv School of Economics. Yes, sorry if the Kyiv School of Economics has many people raising money, but I think it's the president, the provost. I can't remember now, but I know that they have several programs that where they source things for various whatever the Ukrainians need, and I think generators is actually one of them. Yeah, I would start there, and then I can't think of there's a big organization in Odessa, but I can't think of the name of it right now, and I need to give links. Maybe I'll pass links on that.
Yeah, we'd be happy to.
You can put on your website. I think that would be the easiest thing.
Yeah, we'll be happy to, because it's hard to know just what's a legitimate charity, and there's a lot of work done to vet them. And on that question, we have a question from somebody who says, I'm a communications professional who works with a child welfare group in Ukraine. What's the best way to approach you and other Ukrainian journalists with information and sources that are not opportunistic?
Well, I
what
mean,
a nice question.
Well, I mean, I think we get a lot of, we should say, I get many emails every day from people who are pitching stories. It's hard to keep up with all the emails just because we have to keep up with so much of what's happening here. But I think that in terms of opportunism, it's not opportunistic to interview a child. It's just that you have to have the proper safeguards in place. If they have parents with them, have you asked their parents? If they're orphans, have you asked their guardians? Do they want to talk to you? Are they too traumatized to talk to you? We also have some rules at NPR about doing that, but as a journalist, I can't talk to a traumatized kid who doesn't want to talk to me. I'm not going to force him or her. And I'm not going to do it without a parent's permission or a guardian's permission. Sorry. So in terms of opportunism, I'm battling a cold, so I hope you.
You sound great. Thank you.
I hope everybody forgives me for my bad cough today. I think you can approach any journalist with a good story about a child as long as you have those safeguards in place. Right now I talked to Miroslava. I talked to Miroslava's friends. I have a colleague who's talked to a kindergarten class. I mean, it's okay to talk to kids. It's just that, like in the situation that I mentioned, you don't want to talk to a traumatized child who hasn't bathed in 4 months, has been eating like canned food and hasn't seen the sun in 4 months, and probably saw horrible thing. You don't want to talk. I mean, at least I don't want to talk to that kid when he comes out of the bus. I mean, it's just not worth it to me to have that scene if it's going to traumatize the kid, traumatize the child. Sorry, child's a better word than kid.
Traumatized, sure,
Yeah,
sure. And I appreciate your sensitivities around covering children. And just we talked about, we are approaching the 1 year anniversary, and we talked about what's on Ukrainians' mind right now. But something I haven't asked you about that we can end on is we forget there are probably thousands of Ukrainian journalists working in the country. It's not just CNN and NPR and whoever else who have sent in their, parachuted in their people to cover the local story. You have locals who are covering their own country in their own language. How often do you interact with the Ukrainian press corps? And what are their experiences? If you can speak for them, is in that
sure.
way.
I'm not sure if I can speak for them, but I can speak about them, about the ones I've met. I mean, there's some great journalists here, some great journalists who've worked here a long time and who are very capable and very passionate about telling the story of Ukraine. The Kyiv Independent is doing, I think, a great job in keeping people informed about what's going on. From the perspective of somebody who works for Western media and for American media in particular, where we have to constantly check our biases. I think Ukrainian media is much more like obviously pro-Ukraine and supportive of the government and supportive of what the government does. But there are also exceptions. I mean, just the last few days, there was an investigative report about procurement of food and other supplies for soldiers in Ukraine, and it was the prices were 2 to 3 times higher than what you'd see at grocery stores. And there's a Ukrainian media outlet that broke that story and investigated that story. So they do those kinds of stories, and they do try to hold the powerful here accountable. But we do it, I guess we probably do it to a greater degree, or we do it to a greater degree because that's the way we've been trained, and that's the way American journalism operates. But that does, I don't want to discount the fact that the Ukrainian journalists here are doing actually really great work, and it is a pleasure to read. It's a pleasure to meet them and talk to them, and I've met several and have been incredibly impressed. They're all very young, and they're all very smart, and they're all very involved, and they want to learn. They want to learn how to be that person who holds their government to accountable for what it does. Because the thing about these journalists, because they're all young and because they're all idealistic in many ways, they do want a country that operates on merit, and they want a country that operates in a transparent way. And so whatever happens with this war, and they're going to be covering it, from morning till night as I see them doing it, they also have aspirations to make sure that the government keeps their promises in terms of becoming more transparent, harder on corruption, more functional as a country, more developed as a country, and moving towards the West, which is what they want so badly.
Well, I think that's a valuable point to end on, is what Ukrainians are fighting for, which is a value system. It's a worldview,
That's right.
It's a lifestyle, it's an open society, and we may bring you back in a year to update us on reporting, running the Kyiv Bureau. Thank you so much, Joanna Kakissis.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me.
Will you leave us with maybe a story that you're working on that we should be looking out for, your next story?
What can I talk about? That won't get me in trouble with my editors. Let's just say that I'm going back and interviewing lots of people that I've met over the course of this year to do retrospectives and see where they are. Like, people have changed dramatically in the last year. I'm trying to find a way to document it to show our listeners how much this war has impacted people in ways that they didn't expect. So I think that's safe enough to say. That won't get me in trouble with my editors.
Well, we'll listen out for your story, probably sometime in February, I'd imagine, around the
That's
1-year
right.
anniversary.
That's right.
Sure. And we invite our audience to mark your calendars also for Wednesday, March 8th. That is when the World Affairs Council of Atlanta will be hosting our annual International Women's Day breakfast. We are very excited to announce our guest speaker, hopefully within the next week, if we can. And of course, we always invite you to become a member of the World Affairs Council of Atlanta. Your support helps us bring you fascinating conversations like this today with Joanna Kakissis. You can learn more about individual membership or corporate membership and the council at wacatlanta.org. That's also where you can subscribe to our newsletter to stay up to date on our upcoming programs. Until next time, Joanna, thank you for joining us, and thanks to our audience for joining us. We'll see you then.